These are times that are exhilarating because there is so much in the way of evidence that this is a concerted, the first in history, a concerted counterattack against the global cabal that is underway at present. There will be antitrust actions. There will be criminal indictments in other nations as well as here.
Hey friends, this is Sean from SGT Report. Before I play this interview with Wayne Jett, I want to let you know that this interview was recorded on Tuesday. Now, on Wednesday, today, the 5th of May, YouTube took extraordinary measures against more conservatives and conservative speech on YouTube. What are these extraordinary measures? Let's just say that YouTube has taken censorship to the next level with the demonetization of many YouTube channels across the platform without warning, without notice. Included among those channels is the Red Elephants and TruthStream Media. I'll quote this from Really Graceful on Twitter. Today, YouTube censors what they dub hateful and supremacist content, along with those who question the official story of 9/11. Next week, they'll come for your homeschooling and homesteading channels, until all that is left is the talking heads of mainstream media. This is what YouTube wants. They don't care about their falling advertising revenue. They don't care that parent company Google and Alphabet lost $70 billion in market cap because of this exact type of behavior, because demonetizing these important channels that people want to watch, results in YouTube and thereby Google earning less advertising revenue. Remember, YouTube takes somewhere between 45 and 55% of all ad revenue. So when you see an ad on a YouTube channel, just remember YouTube and Google is taking 45 to 55% of that revenue. So when they demonetize these channels, they're hurting themselves. This is what the left does. They have a rape and pillage policy. They don't even care if their behaviors hurt themselves as long as they destroy those of us that are winning in the battle for hearts and minds, in public discourse, in the public square. In my opinion, YouTube is acting illegally, and it's also unconstitutional and 100% anti-American. YouTube doesn't care, even as the DOJ launches an antitrust investigation of Alphabet. And I also tweeted this. I just added Vincent James, the Red Elephants on YouTube, to the list of those I support on Patreon. He was completely demonetized today. He has a family, and he's one of the most intelligent conservative voices on YouTube. Show your support to the Red Elephants on Patreon. Friends, we have to stand behind the producers, the truth content alt media producers that are standing up to CNN's fascism and CNN's lies, that are standing up to the establishment mockingbird mainstream media with truth. And again, because we've been winning the battle and they've clearly been losing audience along with ad revenue and ad dollars, YouTube is changing the rules in the middle of the game, and has been said so many times before, the best way to identify a tyrant is to get him to act like one, and that's what YouTube is doing. So friends, thank you so much for your support on Patreon, and be sure to show your support for other truth tellers who need your support on Patreon as well. And a shout out to one of our sponsors. Again, it's funny, YouTube demonetizes everyone, saying that our content isn't appropriate for most advertisers. We have advertisers that reach out to us because they want to reach you, our highly educated, informed, and patriotic audience. This interview is brought to you in part by our friends at Virtual Shield. Now, why are VPNs important? It's simple. VPNs are powerful and extremely useful for well-informed citizens. That's why entire countries are working to ban them. Is the US next? Hopefully not. If we have a republic, your privacy is paramount. And right now, you can take advantage of the Father's Day special with an extra 20% off all VPN plans and all premium add-ons. Virtual Shield VPN is one of the easiest to use VPNs in the world and one of the fastest. And their no-log policy protects users from any data breaches. And in a world where the NSA continues to try to gather your data, Virtual Shield hides your IP address and encrypts your internet data so your online activity is out of sight of your internet service provider and other would-be snoopers. And regain control of your privacy with IdentiSafe. Virtual Shield's IdentiSafe blocks your webcam, microphone, securely deletes files, history, and more. So protect your personal data right now with Virtual Shield VPN and get 20% off today. I'll leave the link below this video. Now, guys, I want to thank all of you again who discovered the Brave browser and downloaded it. Be sure to install it on your computer. And for those who have not discovered the Brave browser, it's more than twice as fast as Google's Chrome, and it won't spy on you. You'll love it. Give it a try. Once you start using it, you won't go back. So give it a shot. I'll also leave the link for the Brave browser below this video. Hey friends, thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for finding us on YouTube, because they're making it increasingly difficult for you to find us because they're no longer putting SGT report videos in the recommended column on the right, but you'll find plenty of Fox News recommended videos. Ironically, I do have a Fox Business clip I want to play for you in a second, but first let me welcome our guest. It's Wayne Jett. He's the author of 2011's The Fruits of Graft, Great Depressions Then and Now. We've had Wayne Jett on twice before. Today we're going to get to a little bit more covered in his book, but first I want to talk about the DOJ antitrust investigations of Alphabet, Google, and hopefully YouTube. Facebook, Amazon, and Apple are facing scrutiny too. It's good news and it's about time. Wayne Jett, welcome back.
Thanks so much, Sean. Very glad to be here.
Hey, glad to have you back. I had a commenter under a video recently say, hey, you need to get Wayne Jett on. He's great. And I replied by saying, well, we've had him on twice, but we'll get him on again. So, Wayne, it's good to have you back. Did you hear the news about the Department of Justice under Donald Trump launching an antitrust investigation of the big social media giants? Wayne, this is the best news I've heard in, well, we've been hearing a lot of good news about the fall of the deep state and this Trump targeting the real conspirators that colluded against the Constitution and the people of this country. But in that same camp with those colluders are the big social media giants. Let me play this clip for you from Fox Business.
The Justice Department reportedly laying the foundation for a potential antitrust investigation focused largely on the company's search practices, this according to the Wall Street Journal. The company also recovering from an hours-long outage yesterday affecting YouTube, Gmail, other services. Joining me now, Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Anna Napolitano on the antitrust.
Look, it is unusual. I mean, the Wall Street Journal, my hat is off to them as to how they got this. It is unusual for the government to announce that they are beginning an investigation. The investigation of Microsoft, before they filed a single document in court, took 6 years. So we are at the earliest stage. This is not a popularity contest. It doesn't matter what people think of Google. If they're ever charged and it ever comes to trial, there won't be a jury. It's just a judge. It's all economics. Does their behavior enhance or inhibit competition? That's the question that has to be answered. Sounds like it's an easy question. There are thousands of potential answers to it.
I'm going to pause it there, Wayne. My question would be, does their behavior also inhibit free speech? Clearly, they've changed their algorithms to filter out what they deem misinformation. They've announced it publicly, as has YouTube, and it is unconstitutional in my view. It's certainly illegal as it relates to tortious interference, and frankly, it's just un-American. But your thoughts on the antitrust investigation of Big Brother?
Well, I think antitrust is certainly a tool in the federal statutory war chest to go after them. And it's been a long time in coming, no doubt. I mean, what do we have here? In each one of those instances, they are the dominant player. And not only that, but we've seen historical reports, for example, Facebook, about its origin, starting on the day that the DARPA program, designing the same kind of program, went out of business. Facebook all of a sudden is presented to private parties to make billions on. Now, if that's not a cabal operation, I don't know what is. In any event, that is the kind of thing that has been set up, I think, with the assistance of the deep state, certainly with the and for the purposes of the global cabal. The one that the president is fighting. So why wouldn't we expect in due course that this president would go after them? But you recall that the antitrust laws first adopted back in the early 1900s under the presidency of Theodore Roosevelt. Well, he supposedly was the trust buster, but basically the historical evidence is that he went after his political enemies and left his political supporters completely alone. So it was simply another tool to bust the competition of the global elite. Theodore Roosevelt was certainly on their team. You remember, he assumed the presidency as the vice president of William McKinley, who was assassinated. So a typical pattern for that kind of takeover when the man in the Oval Office was not doing their bidding. But we have so many examples of this across the board. what I call mercantilism is the economic system, the power system of the global elite. And it was the academic name given to the process. The academics gave it that respectable sounding name, mercantilism, to make it sound as if they were selling dry goods, but it was really a cover name for the system in which they are dominant in every aspect of the economy and the political system.
Well, that's right. A system of, by, and for the bankers. Let's just stay in the here and now for a second, though, because you said something interesting. FDR targeted his political enemies, right, and left his supporters alone in the cold. Yeah. That reminds me of Barack Obama. That reminds me of Russiagate. That reminds me of Fusion GPS. That reminds me of illegal FISA warrants and spying on then-candidate Trump and then President Trump in cooperation and collusion with the deep state intelligence agencies, namely John Brennan, James Clapper, who else? The FBI's James Comey. This is the biggest story of my lifetime, and the mainstream media is ignoring the truth of the matter and continues to talk, when they do talk about it at all, about Russians hacking the election and helping Donald Trump get elected, which is nothing more than a fable at this point. If we go back to the DOJ antitrust news about Google, Alphabet being investigated, Facebook, Amazon, Apple also facing scrutiny, that's great news. Would you agree with me that those big social media giants are and have proven themselves to be aligned with the deep state and with these fables? Because as they target the information they call, quote unquote, misinformation, and they bury news from people like SGT Report and other truth media, alt media sources on YouTube and on Google with their algorithm changes, they prop up the mainstream media like CNN, MSNBC, and what Donald Trump has called fake news. Now, to me, that would suggest that these social media giants, these Silicon Valley social media giants, are in bed with the deep state, and they are colluding to at least try to prevent Donald Trump from getting reelected in 2020.
Well, no doubt about it. It's clearly the pattern. We've seen that they simply have done the same kind of censorship on the web that the media does in its own reporting. It reports a particular view of society, and it promotes the big lies. The same kind of thing that you can find in each one of those media, so-called alternate media outlets. And it's certainly politically well known that so-called Silicon Valley, that is the big tech giants, have been clearly in the camp of those opposing the elected president, and those who want to depose him and dispose of this first time in a century or more opposition to their goals. They have been on a roll since 1900 on a very purposeful one that, as we've talked about before, according to their manifesto, of wiping out the entire middle class that supports itself by its own efforts, as opposed to depending on the government or simply serving the ruling class that is the elite. I'm not talking about elite in terms of very able people. I'm talking about those who have power over us because of the stolen wealth that they have accumulated for generations.
Right.
And that certainly is very much in play right now. This is the first president who's actually had the opportunity to really take them on since Andrew Jackson, who had to take them on by carrying his own six-shooters with him in order to defend himself.
Right, with multiple assassination attempts on his life. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
these people, these bankers, these Rothschild bankers to be specific, love to take out presidents and have, I believe, throughout our history. We can go all the way back to Abraham Lincoln and talk about that assassination. Might take us off track a little bit, but these people specialize in wet works, which reminds me of Seth Rich. I don't believe Seth Rich was murdered by would-be robbers. I believe Seth Rich was made an example of for being the leaker of the Podesta emails, a DNC insider who was fed up with the corruption he saw, the rigging of the election, the primary against Bernie for Hillary, and he was so fed up with the corruption, he blew the whistle, got the information, I think via Kim.com possibly, but ultimately to WikiLeaks, and he paid for it with his life, Podesta famously emailing that he's all for making an example of the leaker. Let me ask you this. In that Fox Business report, they mentioned the 1-hour internet outage on Sunday, this past Sunday. It's almost it might be unprecedented. A 1-hour internet outage. It took down YouTube, it took down Gmail, it took down Google, I believe it took down Facebook, and many other social media platforms, Twitter included, I believe. What do you make of that? Was that the internet kill switch? Was that the government saying, look, we're not messing around here, big social media giants. If this is what you're going to do, we can take you down. If you're going to collude to fix the election against Donald Trump, we can take the whole internet down. Am I reading too much into it? Do you think that's a possibility?
I think that's a possibility. I don't know how to interpret it, frankly, because it may well have been something done by those giants themselves in order to accomplish certain technical actions that they wanted to take. Certainly what comes to mind is destruction of evidence. And it may be that they were shut down for an hour because they were destroying evidence separately from that, and the government did shut them down to show what could be done if they kept on doing it. I think I'm inclined to believe that destruction of evidence is not going to be effective for them. We've been advised on more than one occasion by QAnon that we have all the evidence. We know what is going on, and I believe that's the case with those giants as well. So it's a matter of getting all the ducks in a row and the timing right in order to take action against them. But I think this announcement of the antitrust action is a good sign. We keep having these good signs, and I know they're preliminary. They're not the final results, but that does take time, and yet we keep moving on one front after another. And I'm very optimistic about what the president is all about. There's nothing whatever that has pushed me off the view that we have, for the first time in my lifetime and long before that, a president that is actually backed by sufficient personal protection to enable him to take actions against the global elite without paying with his life. It's happened time and again, and we've got to make certain, I say we, but the people who are protecting him so far have done a tremendous job. And as everyone, I think, agrees that has an objective eye, he has been able, President Trump has been able to be so productive. I've never seen anything like it. And I'm not sure, I don't think I know a half of what he's actually getting done. We'll know more as the time arrives to get it out in the open. But nevertheless, putting them on warning that antitrust actions are coming, that's a federal statute of a nature, but it is certainly not the only tool that can be used against these companies. I think Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO, is another. And of course, the executive order on human trafficking allows seizure of assets. I'm not putting that tool out of the range of this problem either. These giants are connected with the global elite, and if you're connected with the global elite, you're almost certainly involved with those very corrupt and I think it's not too much to say evil activities that the evidence that has come to view so far indicates they've been involved in.
Well, that's right. I mean, we've been talking about it on this channel now for 2 years or more. Okay, so pedogate, whatever was indicated by the Podesta email links with the coded pedophile language known as Pizzagate, James Alefantis connections, Hillary Clinton, child trafficking out of Haiti with Laura Silsby, 33 children caught at the border. Silsby doesn't do hard time because Bill Clinton comes to her aid. Who else? John Podesta, who Breitbart told us back in 2011 is a world-class underage sex slave op cover-upper defending unspeakable dregs, and it shocked him that the whole world didn't know. Tony Podesta, his interest and penchant for pedophilic art. All of it begs the question, what are these people into? Adam Schiff. The connections run deep, and it leads me to the Democrats. They seem to be absolutely 100% morally bankrupt, anti-American, I mean, I don't know how else to say it, Wayne. They are completely anti-American, and they're clinging to impeachment as hard as they cling to abortion on demand in the 9th month. Let me read this tweet from Representative Jim Jordan on June 3rd. Dems are already moving forward with impeachment. They're just not calling it that because the American people don't want it, and there's no basis for it. Don't take my word for it. Representative Clyburn, the number 3 House Democrat, said yesterday, quote, "I think we've already begun." Wayne, these people are as more, look, I said it a second ago. They're anti-American. They don't care about our borders. They don't care about protecting life. They don't care about anything other than their own power. It's absolutely sick and pathetic.
Well, I'll go back to the 1901 manifesto. It's absolutely in your face, crystal clear. They said it in plain English. English that absolutely would not be permitted on the public stage today. That they were going to destroy people, blacks, browns, yellows, red, dirty-skinned whites, Jews, and so forth. They were going to exterminate people, and they needed to learn how to poison us by the year 2000. That was their goalpost. Poison us in sufficient numbers in order to wipe out the people that would be all except those they wish to be their servants. Now, they have not wavered from that agenda in any respect, to my estimation, since that time. And they've made tremendous progress. They're still at it. They've got control of our prescription drug production.
That's right, the vaccines.
The medical profession.
I sound the alarm on the vaccines. They've done a wonderful job damaging families and children with these vaccines. And the mainstream media remains completely silent about it. And if you talk about anything vaccine related, if you talk about CDC whistleblowers who've come out and said, yes, there is a connection. We knew there was a connection between the MMR vaccine and autism. If you cite that whistleblower, they will call you a conspiracy theorist as opposed to an investigative journalist. The mainstream media refuses to do the journalism because they are in bed with the deep state, the same people that want to exterminate us, Wayne. You're absolutely right. I think it speaks to the resilience of the human spirit and God's creation, our bodies, our immune systems, that we're still alive and kicking despite all of their efforts, because they've been in bed with Satan trying to literally exterminate us. Look at the Georgia Guidestones. You're absolutely right.
No question about it. And every aspect, if you look at any aspect of the American society, I'm not talking about Europe, let's just talk about America. Look at the American society and the forces that are in control of the so-called, seem to be inevitable evolution of the way our society is going, whether it's media or entertainment or schools or medicine or whatever. Every aspect of American society is dominated by this influential, inevitable force that always gets its way, leading people to think that, well, this is just going to be the way it is. There's no way out. This is the way things are going. Well, that is the mark of the beast, in terms of the beast being this mercantilist global cabal that is intent on wiping us out. And we can talk about that all we want, and give all the details that we can come up with, which there are many, and public library operations, staying away from books that are controversial and things of that sort. There's hardly a public library in America that has my book in it. I mean, there are maybe a handful. There are maybe a little more than a handful of university libraries having it. But of the thousands and thousands of public libraries, you'd think somebody would be interested in exactly what killed 3 to 6 million Americans by starving them to death, and would be interested in knowing that there were actions specifically identifiable that put us in that position. And when you line them up and look directly at them, there's no question in my mind, and I think in the minds of your audience, that these actions had to be deliberately designed to demolish the prosperity of the American economic system.
No, that's right. Now let's
during the 20s.
That's right. Let's do this. Let's talk about, this is the perfect segue to FDR. Now, I know the last time we talked, you wanted to get to this list of things that FDR did that stacked the deck against the people and for the bankers. Now, he was touted as the president for the people, and he served from 1933 to 1945. Now, here's what I want to say to make this timely and current. Imagine if Hillary Clinton had gotten into the White House with the media behind her and her Marxist banker ideology. Folks, recall that she told Goldman Sachs in private speeches for which she was paid many hundreds of thousands of dollars, she has two positions on every policy, one public and one private. So she had the policy she would tell the people and the real policy that she knew she'd carry out for her banker masters. Thank God in heaven that that witch didn't get into the White House, folks. Thank God in heaven. It is our countenance, it is our blessing that that which is powerless today. But let's compare her to FDR, the president for the people, the Democrat. What list of things did FDR do that stacked the deck for the bankers, Wayne?
Well, I told you about two more last time, but I have a couple of more for you this time. Last time I wound up, I think, with the banks were put under the Fed control, and the first thing FDR did after the 35 Reform Act gave him control of the Board of Governors of the Fed was to reduce the lending power of banks. First by, increased the reserve requirements of the banks by 50%, and then 6 months later he increased it by another third. That effectively cut bank lending capacity in half. The banks were not in trouble at that time. Their reserves were adequate. By cutting their lending capacity in half, that basically made them call in loans that were even performing loans, causing foreclosures and allowing the consolidation of farmland and people losing their homes and having to go on the trail, more migration and so forth and so on. Okay, we covered that. But let me tell you what else was going on with FDR at the same time. 1936, the same year that he did those actions, 36 and early 37. In 36, somebody tipped FDR that $7 billion in gold was coming as an inflow into the U.S. from Europe. Now, my analysis of that is most likely that was caused by Europeans expecting war in the European theater, selling assets there and transferring them to the United States for investment here, in effect moving to the U.S. to get out of the prospects of war. And nevertheless, $7 billion in new gold was coming into the country. The ordinary practice, the standard rule was, under the gold standard, is that when you have an increase in gold flow, you are required to monetize it, so that the additional prosperity and currency in your own country will allow your people to buy more from others abroad, so that it helps the other countries and everybody prospers more or less in a balanced way. But what did FDR do when he found that $7 billion sounds like pocket change now? But then with the dollar at that time, $35 an ounce for gold, $7 billion would have been a major addition to the monetary base of the U.S. Well, that's not the way FDR saw it. He contacted Morgenthau, his Secretary of the Treasury, and told him, I just got word that we got some hot money coming in from hot gold coming in from Europe, and I don't want this to mess up our economy. It could cause us to have some kind of a situation that we make use of all of this, and it'll get called away, and our economy will be hurt by it. And of course, Morgenthau was probably looking to the ceiling, knowing what a crazy argument that was. But he, nevertheless, took the laboring oar and contacted the Federal Reserve and said, the president wants to sterilize this gold coming in so that it doesn't become hot money and cause us some kind of trouble on down the line. Well, believe it or not, Mariner Eccles, the new chairman of the Fed, appointed by Roosevelt, bucked on it. I don't know whether it was just a fake buck to protect the Fed's reputation and its role in this or not, but he argued with Morgenthau, refused to do it, wrote him a strong letter saying, here are all the reasons this would be very good for the economy. you'd have $7 billion worth of new currency. That would have been a high percentage increase in the amount of money available, especially after all of the money being stripped out of the economy by Roosevelt's own gold purchases.
Now, remind people, Wayne, though, let's just be clear here. This was a time in our history where our money was backed by gold. That's why this is important. That's why the $7 billion in actual currency was a big deal, because they had the gold to back it. See, those things don't matter anymore. And now we're $22 trillion in debt, and we live in a world of fiat. But just explain that to people. It was a big deal because it was the gold we needed to get the currency out there.
That's correct. But what was happening, I'll remind you again, as I said last time, the reason the prices had fallen through the floor and so forth during FDR's reign is that as soon as he took office, he not only confiscated the gold, but he started buying gold on foreign exchange, using currency from the US dollars, to buy gold on foreign exchange, bringing it into the Treasury, but refusing to allow it to be monetized. So what he was doing is, I explained last time, there had been a 92% drop in gross private domestic investment. There was just no money after all of the crash and all of the things they were doing, but he was borrowing money and raising taxes every year in order to use the money to buy gold abroad, bringing the gold into the Treasury, but not allowing it to be monetized. So it was shrinking drastically the money supply in the US. That's why the deflation was so severe. The president was taking the money out and buying gold and not allowing it to be monetized. Well, this was exactly what he did with this $7 billion coming in from other people from Europe in so-called commercial trade, shifting. Their gold was coming, $7 billion worth of gold, and he insisted that it be sterilized. Because the Fed so-called bucked about it and wouldn't go along with Morgenthau, FDR convened a meeting in his office, met with both of them, and of course, Eccles, under the pressure of the president directly, buckled and said, okay, he'd go along with it. So they go back and write up the regulations to provide that this gold will not be monetized. And when they did that, and the regulations came out, they not only sterilized that gold, they sterilized the gold that Roosevelt and the Treasury were buying from U.S. domestic production. They sterilized it all. You can't make dollars. You can't issue dollars based on all this gold we've got.
Let me ask you something. Why would they do that? Let me ask you this. Who was Morgenthau serving? Who was FDR serving? Because I want people to understand that when you mention Eccles, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but the Federal Reserve building in Washington, D.C. today is known as the Eccles building. Is that the same Eccles? Because to me then, Eccles was an agent of the Rothschilds. What's going on here? Well, who was FDR serving? Who was Morgenthau serving? The bankers, right? Somebody wanted this gold. Somebody ultimately got the gold. I can tell you this, Wayne. I don't think that all the gold we're told is in Fort Knox is still there, since they haven't audited the stuff since, what, 1954? Who got all the gold?
Well, that remains to be seen. I can't answer that one, but I'll tell you for certain that everyone who has served the Fed, been chairman of the Fed, is ultimately serves the cabal. As far as the chairman of the Board of Governors, the chairman is a facial representative of the Fed, but by no means controls the Fed. The Open Market Committee, so-called, is in New York, at the New York Fed, and it does all of the so-called market activity of the Fed. It does basically, in my opinion, whatever it wants, and its actions are then so-called listed and rubber stamped but when the Board of Governors meet. But most certainly, Eccles, if anything, he was from Utah. He was undoubtedly had Mormon wealth and so forth, but that's why the building was named after him. He was FDR appointee, as so-called a man of the people. But ultimately, he rolled over for exactly what was demanded. There's no question whatsoever. My book has comprehensive evidence that FDR was most definitely a highly trusted, maybe the most trusted political operative the cabal has ever had. He was given his head with his political judgment as to how to put out the word and convince people of what can be done. And he advanced their agenda more sharply than any other president in history. Yet, for some reason, they've most likely found a need to dispose of him at the time of his death, since it appears to have been by foul means as well.
Yeah. Well, I just say it's interesting too. You look back at this history as we have this conversation, and the common man who read the newspapers and, you know, paid a dime to get a newspaper or paid a nickel to get a newspaper on a street corner, they had no idea that the Federal Reserve was privatized. The 1913 Federal Reserve Act set the whole thing up of, by, and for the bankers. And so whatever happened with Eccles, maybe that was more like maybe that was more for show. The bottom line is FDR was carrying the water for the bankers. One way or the other, the bankers always seem to get what they want. But now at least people know the Federal Reserve is privately owned and not for the people.
Well, you see, FDR right out of the box, as soon as he was inaugurated, in 1933, practically his first action was to cease the surrender of gold to Americans for their paper dollars. That was the essential mechanism that assured value for labor, value for production in your pocket at your request, actual value, intrinsic value of the gold. Otherwise, you have a paper promise. That is such an essential part of the mechanism for money that it must be there, or you have to, you wind up having to trust a central authority as to whether you ever get your actual value for what you worked for.
Right.
And of course, that's exactly where we are now. But in addition to this sterilization, they sterilized all the gold, even gold being purchased from U.S. factories. That was to make certain nobody had any money, which was the hallmark of the Depression all the way through. But here's what happened. 1938, the aftermath of all this, the Depression was so bad that by that time it was called the Roosevelt Depression. And the Democrats, who had already taken control of the House back in 32, the Democrats lost 83 seats in the 38 off-year elections. And so in 1939, they would have none of it in terms of increasing taxes again, which was a hallmark of FDR. He wanted taxes and raised and new taxes every year he was in office, including 39, but they refused to allow him to do it. Now, I got this one more story I need to tell you. To put the lid on this thing about that period of time. March of 1939, FDR had been on a lengthy naval cruise, which he used to, I guess, soothe his nerves and so forth and so on. He enjoyed those things. He finally got back, and Morgenthau in his diary reports that he was able to arrange his first luncheon meeting with him on March the 5th. I think it was a Wednesday. And so they're having lunch, and he tells FDR, Mr. President, I think I know how we can whip this depression. We've worked up a plan for tax cuts. Essentially, he was talking about across the board tax cuts. I think that if we have this, you adopt my plan, we can have an economic boom within a month. FDR kind of looks at him and is obviously skeptical, as Morgenthau apparently expected. But nevertheless, he was ready for him. Morgenthau says, let me come over to your office and present this plan to you, Mr. President. I'd like to do that right away. And when I come, I want to I want to do this. I want to bring you a little sign that I've got on my desk. Someone, one of our constituents came in, visited me, and brought me this little sign, and I put it on my desk. People love it when they come in. It says, "Does it help the recovery? I want to bring you one just like it." And so they set the meeting. The meeting was for 2 days later, Friday. And so Morgenthau shows up at the White House. He's got his number 2 guy. His name's John Haynes with him. And Haynes makes the pitch. They describe the tax cuts. They're talking about it. And try to cut it short a little bit. Roosevelt is obviously not happy with the presentation. And he says, you know, you're trying to talk me into doing something that's going to convince my political enemies that they've won. My people will think that I'm giving in to the big business people. And he says, I'll wind up being hauled out of office by a man on horseback. And apparently referring to the possibility of a military coup. In any event, Morgenthau said, "No, Mr. President, no." This is according to Morgenthau's personal diary. "Mr. President, they'd love you. If you solve this depression, you'll be the greatest president in U.S. history." And so Roosevelt says to him, "That little sign of yours about does it help the recovery is very silly. This is not about recovery. This is a matter of politics." Those are the notes and the published diary of Henry Morgenthau Jr. He and Haynes were leaving the office of the president with their tail between their legs, and the president calls out to him, "For God's sake, don't be so innocent."
Yeah. You know what, Wayne, that reminds me, you told us the last time we spoke that the whole purpose of the Depression and making it so prolonged was so that the cabal could go in and buy up all the real assets for pennies on the dollar. And it reminds me what they've been doing to us forever. It reminds me of the Battle of Waterloo, where the Rothschilds had the fastest horses and the best intelligence. And they found out that Napoleon had lost at the Battle of Waterloo, but they sold assets into the market suggesting that Napoleon had won, driving prices down by 80–90%, and then bought them all back a day or two later at pennies on the dollar. It's what these people specialize in, and it sounds like they got FDR to do their bidding in this country.
Well, no, absolutely no question. I have further proof of that in my chapter 17, but it wasn't just asset consolidation. That certainly was one of the advantages they had, but they were looking to destroy the middle class and take as big a chunk out of it as they could by starving people to death and by breaking the financial health of every American who works for a living. Everyone except themselves. And they had every advantage of doing it. They had a president that was doing everything necessary to make it happen. And as I've said before, the only social science studies I've seen, one indicates 3 million Americans died of starvation.
I know.
And 6 million was the other one.
Well, we come full circle here because now recall when we segued back to FDR, I said, imagine if Hillary Clinton had gotten into the White House with this willing accomplice in the deep state mainstream media behind her, propping her up, calling her Madam President and that she's so wonderful, right? Meanwhile, she would be implementing these anti-human, that's what they are, anti-human, anti-American policies to do exactly what FDR did in service of the bankers. I really think we dodged a bullet, and we are in for the fight of our lives because literally it is the fight for our lives. Again, guys, the Democrats, morally bankrupt and clinging to impeachment as hard as they cling to abortion on demand in the 9th month. These are anti-human, anti-American policies. And I, for one, am very grateful that the witch isn't in the White House and that this man, President Donald Trump, is, and he is standing up against the deep state. Wayne, what is your prognosis for our nation? Give us a look at the 2020 elections as you see them. Do these morally bankrupt Democrats have a single candidate that they can actually run against this president? Because Joe Biden's got all sorts of problems, not the least of which is corruption he's involved with in Ukraine with his son. All sorts of corruption just about with any one of these Democrats we look at.
I don't see a candidate on the horizon for them. And whether the candidate, they come up with a miracle candidate that is completely out of sight now, I don't see it happening. But regardless of the candidate, what policies are going to be presented? The ones they're presenting are absolutely anathema to most Americans. They are not going to happen. The only way it can happen is with the voters pouring across the southern border that also came in and by the plane load nightly during the Obama administration. From around the world to dilute our nation and to dilute the voting to provide the kind of votes that they need. But these are times that are exhilarating me because there is so much in the way of evidence that this is a concerted, the first in history, a concerted counterattack against the global cabal that is underway at present and well underway, both by law enforcement and by military means. Yes, from time to time there are deceptive moves. It can't be all at one time, but nevertheless, I think that this is the time at which we are going after the members of the cabal, undermining them in terms of the ownership of their assets, taking them into custody. My goodness, I even saw a news report that was major media talking about how the more wealthy people in our society are extending their lives by taking blood from young people, or having, what do you call it, injections or intravenous blood flow added to their body.
Infusions, yes, I've heard about that. Right. I mean, just like the elite like to drink the blood of babies, we're told. Now it's becoming
they haven't
popular.
mentioned where they get that young blood or how, or the adrenaline that they like to have in it to make it all the better. But that is such a sick menu of things on the Democrat side of the political spectrum.
Well, as Q has said, Wayne, these people are sick, pure evil. And I think that as this stuff becomes more and more uncovered and the deep state is laid bare, more and more people are going to wake up. Let me ask you this before we let you go. If you don't mind me asking, how old a man are you?
I'm 76.
76. So you've seen a heck of a lot. You're a living historian for us. Your book is The Fruits of Graft. You guys should get it. We can tell you how in a second. But I agree with you. This awakening is worldwide, because just think of where we were 10 years ago. People were waking up to 9/11. People were waking up to false flags. People were waking up to the Federal Reserve being private of and for the bankers. Now people are waking up to the importance of sovereignty and liberty. Look what's going on in Europe. Macron, a Rothschild puppet, defeated. Le Pen, chosen to lead. Look at Nigel Farage, chosen to lead. The people want Brexit. They ousted Theresa May. This is a global great awakening, and it is indeed a very exciting time to be alive.
Let me just mention, I'm sure you saw the picture when President Trump was in Tokyo of the street demonstration of Japanese with a great big Trump 2020 sign, and just above it was a handmade sign saying, "Thank you, President. Thank you, America, for liberating Japan."
Yeah. No, it's exciting.
We're not talking about World War II. We're talking about liberating now.
Right. That's right.
Japan has been under the domination, just like North Korea has been, just like South Korea has been, by this global cabal, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and right on up and down the line, just victimized in so many different ways, far too numerous to list or mention. But it is a great prospect that we're looking at here. And the very fact that there have been so many indicated attempts to assassinate, all unsuccessful, thank God so far. And we pray for him daily. I'm sure many Americans do. And I still have high prospects, and I'm looking for important developments in the near term, more in the way of criminal indictments. There will be antitrust actions. There will be criminal indictments. There will be international activities as well that call these people out in other nations as well as here. And so I think we're going to be making great progress this year and next year. I don't think we're going to have to wait on most respects till after the 2020 elections. I don't believe it. I don't think the political landscape is going to be anywhere close in November of 2020 as it stands right this minute. Yeah. It's going to be shaken very substantially between now and then.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. We're seeing so many wonderful things happen, and you have to imagine how scared these puppet masters now are, right? They may have multi-trillions of dollars. They may have the most elaborate castles ever built in human history, but now the people know who they are, and their globalist New World Order talking points are being absolutely 100% rejected as the anti-human strategies that they are. And that's the very best news in the world, Wayne.
We have to get some action on the domestic front on drugs, on the vaccinations. We have to get domestic action on stopping that spraying in our skies that's poisoning everybody, destroying people's minds, destroying people's property with these violent storms and flooding and so forth. Geoengineering is doing that. The people in airplanes spraying our skies with micron-sized metallic particles that are magnetized and
aluminum and barium. Yeah, I know. Yes. I know. Well, it's a gigantic problem. So is 5G is a concern. Well, maybe we should get you back on. I didn't know we were going to take a left turn there with geoengineering, but you're right. And Dane Wigington talks about, so many of us are concerned about it, and we'll talk about geoengineering, 5G, and other issues that are of concern to you next time we have you on. In the meantime, can you tell people now, I know the last time you were on, you had 750 books remaining of The Fruits of Graft. You sold out of all of them in 8 hours. Have you printed more? Can people pick up a copy now?
Oh, yes. We had them already, even as of the last time I was on, and we have sold some more of those. So I thank your audience. We certainly have them, and I think we're more efficient now. They're no longer available on Amazon except in the electronic book form, the Kindle book. But the hardback sewn-bound binding, the Smith sewn they called it, the way books used to be made when it was important for them to stay in one piece for more than one semester. And in that circumstance, this is one that needs to be kept for the ages. I know I'm saying a lot there, but there is no other place to get the truth about what was done to make the Great Depression happen and to kill as many people as possible, but also to break the economic, financial prosperity of as many Americans as possible during those years, and then to send them off to war after that as well. Classicalcapital.com is my website, classicalcapital.com. You can also just search for my name and you'll find it that way. But it's $25 for the hardback copy. I think it's, I'm keeping the price as low as possible, and it's free shipping within the United States. But other countries are interested in it and are ordering, and I've discounted their postage somewhat. But in any event, I'm very happy to be on and always happy to talk with you, Sean. You're a great exponent of the same aims and objectives that I'm aiming for. I'll tell you that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Wayne, very much. We'll all carry the torch for liberty moving forward. I think the cool thing about patriotism is that it's addictive. You know, once you're awake, you can't go back to sleep. And once you're awake to patriotism, sovereignty, and you love the Bill of Rights, then none of these spells they cast work. The mainstream media has lost their power. It's just like, honestly, a magician's trick. Once you see how he does the trick, you see right through it every time. So the trick doesn't work anymore.
Well, you see President Trump out there, and boy, I'm telling you, I think he gets more popular every time he goes out to a rally. And every time he takes more action, as he is on a daily basis. So they can talk all the way they want to about how rude he is, but boy, it is so wonderful to have someone willing to be rude against the tyrants and the evildoers that have been victimizing our people as far back as our country goes.
Yeah.
Before that.
Yeah, and he's exposing them. I mean, we can now see that the emperor has no clothes as it relates to the Democrats and the mainstream media. Guys, our guest has been Wayne Jett. The book is The Fruits of Graft, Great Depressions Then and Now. You can get it at classicalcapital.com. Wayne, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Yeah, my pleasure, and we'll talk again soon. Guys, if you're still with us at this point, thank you so very much. Do give this video a like and share it in your sphere of influence on social media. It will really help us out since YouTube changed their algos to shut us up. So thank you very much. You know how much we love you. You guys are the most generous audience in all of YouTube. I firmly believe it. I've heard it from James Perloff, from Wayne Jett, from all sorts of authors, Donald Jeffries. You guys are so supportive, and a special shout out to my patrons who are keeping us in this fight. God bless you, one and all. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
They want an insurance policy so that should she, for any reason, lose, remember, 100 million to 1. But should she lose, we'll have an insurance policy and we'll get this guy out of office. And that's what they said, and that's what they meant. That's treason. That's treason.